know what the, oh. I don't know what the date is, the 6th.
All right. So I'm excited to be with you. This is Critical Race Theory. I'm really excited because this is a new book. It's just fresh off the presses, and it's by a rising superstar in critical race theory, Kiara Bridges. And I've been talking to her. We're going to try and have her teach one of the classes at some point. We're just trying to work it out. But she just published this book, and she was at Boston College School of Law. We just moved over to Berkeley, so she's still working through some of these ideas. So I watched her sort of develop in terms of her scholarship, and I think this is an excellent contribution to the literature. So look forward to seeing and working through that. So today we're going to do some introductions. It's always good and appropriate to sort of go around and see who everybody is. There's a lot of people in here. That's good. Then we'll talk about the syllabus and how we discuss difficult issues in here. Then I will go through the book and we'll talk about some things. And we're really going to today sort of do the groundwork in developing the themes underlying a critical race theory. Some people say there are 2 or 3 themes. Some people say 5 or 6. You see in my email, I put about 6 in there. But these are major things that we will be doing. Another thing is this book is excellent as a primer. It sort of breaks down all the theories. But I think you should have a grounding in the scholarship of critical race theory. So I'm putting together a supplement. It should be ready Thursday. And I'll send out a note to you about it being ready of all of the, well, I can't even say most. Some of the major foundational law review articles on critical race theory. So, I mean, you have to know about whiteness as property, or you have to know about mapping the margins, intersectionality, or you have to know about the interest convergence theory. So I've sort of taken some of these major articles, and they're sort of excerpts, so they're in essay form, and sort of plug them into the different chapters. So today we're just doing the introductory work, but in the next coming weeks you'll see that there's supplemental readings too. Not too much, but sort of additional readings that sort of take these theories that we're talking about and put them into practice. So you'll see that. I think that will help us. So we're going to go around the room. I'm sorry for being back in the 8th grade or something. Go around the room, introduce yourself, tell us what you're interested in this course, and then we'll move on from there. So who wants to start? I'll start with you, Mr. Johnson.
I'm Dimitri Johnson. Pleasure to meet y'all. I'm a second-year student here, president of Black Law Students. I'm interested in this class, so see how it is.
I'm Shane Cox. I'm 3L. I'm looking to learn more in this class and also to see if I can be more than just my skin color.
I'm Kelly Muir. I'm a 2L. I'm interested in this class because it's a good foundation for restorative justice as it relates to race and maternal health and mortality.
My name's Sarah Walls. I'm a 2L, and I'm interested in this course because I think there's a lot that the law has failed when it comes to race, and so you need to understand where it's failing in order to remedy that in the future. So that's all I'm interested in.
I'm Emily Anderson. I'm technically a 2L. I'm in the dual degree program, and I took this class because it kind of goes with my dual degree, which is social work.
My name is Sophia P. I'm 3L. I am interested in this class because I want to know more about the critical race theory and how that goes into intersectional issues of gender as well as other oppressed groups like LGBTQ rights and also race. Just the whole class is really cool.
I'm Michael Shinara, and I'm really interested about this class to just learn more about the topic.
I'm Sasha Owen. I'm a 2L. I'm interested in the class because it seems like this topic is a very teachable issue, and so to have those proper tools to have those conversations with people who aren't necessarily as interested or well-versed.
My name's Morgan Norris. I'm 2L. And basically, I don't know anything about this stuff, so I kind of want to learn a whole lot and kind of educate myself a little bit better.
I'm Julie Baylor, and I'm a 2L, and I also took this class because I think the law is failing in a lot of areas when it comes to this, and like Alan said, and Sasha and Morgan said, you kind of need to understand it yourself before you can remedy it and teach others that it needs to be changed as well.
I'm Alexa Elder. I'm a 3L, and I just took this class to learn more about the relationship between the law and race.
I'm Emily Lynch. I'm a 3L. I took this class because it seemed like an interesting topic, and it wasn't a traditional law school class.
I'm Emily Canola. I'm a 3L. I'm going to be a public defender, so that's why I wanted to take this class. Most of the people that I represent, the reality is that they will be black or people of color, so I want to learn more, and Professor Powell's also the best professor.
You're just saying that.
My name is Jessica Murch, and I'm a 3L. I took this class because where I come from, my county back home, a lot of people don't know how important this theory is, and also I went to learn criminal defense and hopefully be a public defender, so I thought it was really helpful.
Hi, my name is Alexis Russell. I'm a 3L also. I'm taking this class because I try to be as intersectional a feminist as I possibly can and bring that into everything, especially my future practice. But I have a lot to learn, a lot to learn, and I second what Emily said about Professor Powell.
I'm Amanda Webb. I'm a 2L. My bachelor's degree is in sociology, so I've just always been interested in social justice, social issues.
My name's Emily Winebeaver, and I'm a 2L as well, and I just think this course will hopefully provide some perspective that I've never really been in before.
Okay. And I'm Cedric Merlin Powell. I won't tell you how old I am. So this is sort of lead us into the syllabus. I'm very interested in this topic. I've written on it for years, and my primary areas are the 14th Amendment and a little bit of the First Amendment, but primarily the 14th Amendment. And one of the things that I do, I analyze how neutrality on some level reinforces oppression. So I look at a number of different things. The political process, the First Amendment, my most recent article I did on the political process theory and how that sort of perpetuates this myth that everything is democratic when actually the court is actually reinforcing systemic inequality. So I say all of that to say this. That's my bias. But this course isn't to indoctrinate or tell you this particular view. We want all exposure. We want a free flow of ideas. We want to push on some of these issues issues. And you'll see, even in some of the readings, we have included criticism of critical race theory, because when this first came out, people was like, oh, it's just storytelling, and Derek Bell is just making up these stories, and how can we quantify it, and this is just anecdotal evidence, and this whole parable telling has nothing to do with the law. It's not really a rigorous discipline. So there is a little bit of scholarship on that by Daniel Farber and Susanna Sherry, who really challenged this and said, you're telling stories out of school, and what does that mean if it doesn't look like traditional legal scholarship? So it took a while for this discipline to gain traction, but now it's been over 30 years, so we're going to look at that. So we did the introductions. Let me sort of go through the syllabus and what we're trying to do. And I haven't posted this yet. It's just cleaning it up before I do post it. But so this book is going to help us. The book has a great theoretical grounding, and so that's what we'll be looking at. And that's what we'll be looking at, so that's important. But we're also going to be supplementing that with some of the reasons. I'll talk about that in a minute. So what we're trying to do is engage in a critical analysis of the law and its underlying institutions. We're going to look at that. We're going to allow you to identify and critically unpack the significance of race as a normative principle in the law. We're going to help you demonstrate your ability to understand and analyze and critique conceptual theories like critical race theory, structural inequality, process theory, theories of transformative justice. You're going to get some reading and writing and research work and trying to navigate these difficult questions. And then you're going to produce a substantively researched, well-edited research paper that satisfies the writing requirement and demonstrates your ability to produce high-quality work. You're deepening your knowledge, expanding your interpretive skills, and refining your perspectives on society and the lawyer's role as a public citizen, advocate, and lawyer committed to the public interest. So that's what the syllabus is going to say. You'll see that. So the requirements of this course, you're going to do 3 little short papers. They're just like 1-pagers, based upon what we're talking about in class, or something you may read in the New York Times, or something you may see on TV, or something you may encounter in your life. And it's just a reflection on something dealing with critical race theory. And you'll develop that as we're going on. So nothing major to do yet. The first paper is going to be January 27th. Again, these are 1 and 2 pages tops. Or the next one will be February 10th, and then the final one will be February 24th. But this is all in the syllabus. So these are short 1 and 2 page paper reflections, no research involved or anything. So, for example, say if we talk about interest convergence theory, and you see something in the news that sort of illustrates that, you could do a reflection on that. Or say one day you're watching TV and you're watching Fox, and they are engaging in a particular discussion, maybe you can unpack that and talk about that. So there is no liberal orthodoxy in this course, I'll just say that, because I think it's important for people to be free and critical thinkers, so that's what we're shooting for. So these reflection papers will help you do that. And then there's a 25-page research paper, and that's it. And I have a little dates in here about when to do that. So like a 1-page abstract of the paper, so I can just see what you're talking about, say maybe it needs to be narrowed or broadened or whatever. And then you have a first draft, whatever that is, in March, and I'll mark that up. And then the final paper won't be due until the last day of class. I think April 20th is the last day of classes. And I think Monday classes are meeting on April 20th, so that'll be our last day of class, April 20th. And then we go through the syllabus. The syllabus has the chapters in it, as well as the supplemental reading. So just look at the date, and you'll see the chapter that we're doing, and then the supplemental reading. There's some chapters that don't have any supplemental reading. So finally, let's talk about ground rules for discussion. So whenever you're dealing with race, you're dealing with dynamite, right? So it's important. And some people have a level of understanding, other people don't. There are no dumb questions here. We're trying to unpack and deal with this difficult discussion. So I'm really excited that there's so many people in this class. That's good. So we're trying to inform our critical understanding of the law and its relationship to dominant societal factors like race. And so we all need to recognize that talking about race and racism is hard work. Our goal is to have these conversations that are productive and rewarding. But also, we're not asking any of us to hide our feelings of discomfort or frustration. That's part of it. So what are the ground rules? Taking turns when we speak, no walking on the words of others. Thinking about how we express ourselves, no put downs or racial slurs. You wouldn't do that anyway. This is just standard language. We can speak for ourselves, but we should not try to generalize about others. So that means we're critically assessing stereotypical thinking and trying to avoid it. We're not going to solve the problems of race and its many manifestations in this course. We're not here to debate issues and try to convince each other about what we might think is right. But through active participation and listening, our goal is to really find common ground, a lens for analyzing how race functions in society through the exposition of distinct viewpoints. Everybody will have their own viewpoint. And that's a part of intersectionality too. There's race and your identity on a number of different levels. We recognize that some of us having a conversation about race is a new experience. That's fine. And some of us have had these type of conversations many times. So feel free to ask questions and express our lack of awareness or understanding about these issues. All that is in the syllabus, and I'll be posting that by the time of our next class. And then I just wanted to illustrate these supplemental readings. And again, they should be ready by Thursday, and I'll send out a note. But for each chapter, there might be supplemental readings. There's some without any supplemental readings. So, for example, next week, January 13th, one of the things that we're going to be talking about is the liberal discourse on race. So liberalism sounds like something great, and it is, but there are a number of presumptions in terms of liberalism and how it works. Liberalism sort of deals with, well, the process is open. If we just keep working hard, we will obtain social justice incrementally, and that's the way we should do it in order to preserve societal order. So we've come a long way, and we should continue to do so. And so we're going to see some of the ideological and theoretical tensions in that type of thinking when we look at classical legal thought, then we look at realism, then we look at the critical legal studies movement, and then we look at the emergence of critical race theory. Because on all of those levels, there was this notion that the law is neutral, it functions well, it's fair, it's objective, but then people who were kept out and impacted by that pushed back, and that's what critical race theory is, starting around 1989. So, for example, January 13th, when we talk about the conservatism of liberal discourse on race, we're going to look at something by Derek Bell. It's called After We're Gone. It's an adaptation of one of his parables. One of the things that he does is he takes hypotheticals and relates them to race. This one is particularly well known and devastating. It asks the question, what happens if a spaceship came to the United States? The United States has scarce resources, but it can get all the money that it wants and all the resources that it wants if it makes a choice. And the choice is what group has to leave, what group has to go into outer space. This is the parable of the space traders. And so the question is, and the society votes on this. You know, we have we're all members of society, nice. We all can vote, that's democratic, but we have to make the choice of which group has to lead the planet and what that has. So that's going to be interesting. It's called After We're Gone, and it's the parable of the space traders, but it's an adaptation of that. And then Neil Baton, the critique of our Constitution is colorblind. That is, on some level, a critique of neutrality, but it takes what Justice Harlan says in Plessy versus Ferguson, and then develops a whole theory around that of how the Constitution has been interpreted over the years in order to reinforce and reify discrimination. And then also in that chapter is a critique of critical race theory, what I mentioned. And so you'll see from the syllabus that sometimes we'll cover 2 or 3 chapters, because these chapters are relatively short, and they're like 20 chapters, so I think that we'll be able to get through the whole book. It's only like 400 pages in the book, but with the supplement and stuff, we're doing 400 or 500 pages, which is good. So that is the course, and again, I'll post that very soon. Now, what about this book and what we are looking at? What about those vignettes? Did you check those out? The early part of the book, it sort of just opens up, and what I think she's trying to do here, this is page 1 to 9 in the book, what she's trying to do here is look at race and then, but there might be another explanation for it. Like, for example, she talks about Michael Brown and Ferguson and talks about the response to him. Now, you could say that that's a violent police response based upon profiling and stereotypical understanding of black men in society and a presumption of criminality. But then there's this neutral explanation, well, he didn't cooperate. And so how do you rationalize that? And she goes through all of these vignettes to show that there are these alternate understandings, and then asks this central question, why should we focus on race? But some people would say that we're focusing on race too much and exacerbating tensions that are underlying in our society, and the only way to heal is like to move beyond race. Like in Parents Involvement, Chief Justice Roberts says the way to get beyond race is to stop thinking about race, to stop discriminating on the basis of race. So one way to do that is to stop thinking about it. Well, how did you take these vignettes and get a common theme, and then how does that common theme fit into critical race theory? What do you think? And there's not going to be a right answer, I want you to sort of look at these vignettes and say, well, how do we explain this? And she pretty much, so for example, take what happened in Flint, Michigan. Some would say, well, this is a black poor community, therefore that's what's happening. The neutral response is that the city has scarce resources. They made a bad decision, but the decision wasn't race-based. They were trying to save money. How do you do it? Go ahead. Yeah.
I think she kind of touched on it too, but it almost seems like it would be nearly impossible to look at things about race, because race is almost always kind of looking over the shoulder of every other issue. Because to look at Flint specifically, you're looking at a systemically poor area of town, and it just so happens that ends up being a town of color or a city of color. So even if you want to move away from it, you can't, because that's something that just naturally comes with these issues. I think she said something along the lines of, it can be a coincidence that they all fall into people of color.
And so what if I push back and say, well, there's a neutral reason. We have scarce resources. The city manager has to make some very difficult decisions, and not even thinking about race. Race isn't even mentioned. We just made the decision that it costs a lot to have these type of pipes and filtration systems. So we're going to do something different. And so what about that?
I feel like that's one of those things where like, you can't remove race, because since that area is like a city of people of color predominantly with lower income, if you're going to say that you don't want to invest the time and the money and the resources, then you need to be able to move that group of people into an area that already has those resources, that can already provide for them, and give them the same standard that somebody else can have without a fault of their own.
Anybody else?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
So a lot of these vignettes I thought were disturbing, but I think the issue is it correlation or causation? Is the race just like incidental to these circumstances, or is race the root cause of these outcomes? I think a lot of the problem stems from lack of information all throughout the process. In my opinion, it's like why do you stereotype anything? It's because you need quick information and you don't know anything about that individual, so you just go into some kind of generalization, and it's and then you have the public, which is trying to find an easy explanation most instantly for why these things happened, but it's like we don't know the exact circumstances of what took place, and so it's like this rush to come up with the answer quickly. And that's what we're dealing with in this course.
So how do you negotiate that tension between whether race is incidental or a core issue and this notion of a neutral explanation for the way that things happen? Because that illustrates something very important. You can even see the way, if you take your common law class and look at equal protection, how it's taught. We're always looking for the discriminatory perpetrator. We want intentional discrimination, Washington v. Davis. Or you look at a case like Croson, and it just talks about, yeah, there might be discrimination, but you haven't clearly identified it. And if you're just talking about societal discrimination, that's amorphous. That's just something that exists. So there's always this disconnect between impact racially and rational explanation. How do you negotiate that with some of the things you're talking about?
I mean, I can only speak on a personal level.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't need to take everything with a grain of salt. It's like I try to get as much information as I can to try to see beyond someone's immutable characteristics that they're born with. But at the same time, like I fully recognize that people are born into a group that they identify with. I don't know, probably not a good case to ask that.
Oh yeah,
okay, maybe
yeah, that's right. Go ahead. That's good.
You know, we want to live in a world where racism doesn't exist. My question is, it's like I don't mean to skip the whole course.
Yeah, let's go.
If critical race theory, we're absolutely correct, and it solved the problem of racism, like we eliminated it from our society and our system and so on and so forth. But at a certain point, are we like teaching a new generation about racism when they would have grown up without it experiencing it?
So what's the historical significance if we reach the aspirational goal of post-racialism? Yeah, well, we're concerned about history repeating itself, though. That's a concern. And a concern about neutrality, sort of saying, well, all of this occurred and we can move forward. And that may or may not be true, but a lot of times we're going to see in here that there are present-day effects of past discrimination. So how do we measure that? So that's going to be interesting. Good. So what do you think critical race theory is, now that we're sort of talking about it around? What do you think it is? And that may also respond to Mr. Cox's notion of what are we teaching. What do you think critical race theory is as as a discipline, as an analytical enterprise. What are these scholars trying to do? Some people say, well, they're just writing larger articles, talking to themselves, and just trying to show how fancy they are about race. I mean, that was a criticism early on. But go ahead, yeah.
Well, I think it's trying to address that the law is colorblind, and it says that it's colorblind, but trying to address that it's actually not.
Okay.
And by ignoring that is another way to perpetuate violence through our legal system.
Okay. So you're going to see that in the Tanda's article, Critique of Our Constitution is Colorblind. So all these articles, these supplemental things, are sort of key critical race theory articles that sort of develop some of these things. So why don't we look at some of the major core themes? I think I put this in my little email to you, and we can jump around and look in the book as well. But one thing is, well, I'll do my email first and then sort of go through what the book says in the introduction. So one thing I said, these are basic tenets. People work with them in different ways. And I think it's a mistake just to think that so-and-so is a critical race theorist, or this scholar is a critical race theorist, so he thinks this way. I mean, I think, as it was pointed out in the readings, it's a really big tent, and people approach it differently in how to negotiate, how they look at the law. Some people emphasize a number of different things. Other people just focus on one different thing. So it's a fairly big tent. But these themes are really organizing principles of critical race theory. One is that racism is ordinary, so ordinary, in fact, that it often goes unacknowledged unless it's a blatant form of discrimination. So we're talking about the law. For example, the Shelby County voting case just recently. In that case, Chief Justice Roberts talks about all the progress that's been made since 1965. So this is another example of a post-racial decision, that you really don't need the Voting Rights Act and covered jurisdictions anymore because you had an African-American president, you have African-American mayors, congressmen, maybe one senator, but you have overcome all of that. There's no poll tax, there's no lynching, there's no violence at the polls or anything like that. And all these subtle things, like ID checks or fraud checks or identification requirements, those are subtle, neutral things that really have nothing to do with discrimination unless you can prove that the state intentionally did it. And of course you can't. So the court says that the Voting Rights Act is outmoded. You're just reenacting it based upon 40-year-old evidence, which is out of date. So that's an example of the court saying, unless we can prove that these states who were previously covered jurisdictions, unless we can prove that they're actively discriminating, then they shouldn't be under federal control. And another thing that's really interesting about this Shelby case is a new interpretation of what federalism is. In other words, this comes out of what Justice Rehnquist was doing, Chief Justice Rehnquist and his court. You've heard about the new federalism, but this is a further permutation of that in anti-discrimination law, saying that once you reach a certain point, the federal court should get out of it. And the court has done that in a number of different ways. It's done it in the school desegregation cases you've seen, voting rights, Title VII. So all these things are sort of being re-envisioned based upon this principle that unless it's some type of blatant discrimination, and you can't prove anything intentional, then discrimination doesn't exist. There must be some other explanation for all of these disproportionate impacts that we're talking about in these vignettes. And if there's another neutral explanation, the court is going to embrace that. So that's one thing. Insurance convergence. So Derek Bell caused a major stir when he reinterpreted Brown versus Board of Education. Even in the way that we teach it in common law, it's like 1896 Plessy versus Ferguson, and then there was some. No one really. It would take a semester to go through all of the different state and federal cases that sort of percolated between 1896 and 1954. There's a whole series of cases, even here in Kentucky, that sort of lead up to Brown versus Board of Education. And there's even a case in 1948 where Latino pupils challenged separate but equal and won. That was a federal case, so no one really talks about it. But there's a whole series of cases that lead up to Brown versus Board of Education. But what is interesting is Derek Bell challenges this notion of Brown and says, yeah, okay, it's the result is fine. It overrules separate but equal. But how did that come about? And he argues it was no real concern about desegregating schools or anything. It was so that America could have a positive face on its relations in terms of diplomacy during the Cold War period. In other words, Russia and other communist countries are saying, you are oppressing African American students and excluding them on this color line. How can you lecture us about democracy? So a lot of people like Derek Bell and there's a historian named Mary Duliak, I'm mispronouncing her name, but anyway, they argue that Brown versus Board of Education only comes about because of America's self-interest in its own diplomacy. And so one concept of critical race theory is that anything that benefits people of color is really secondary or collateral to the self-interest of whites. And Brown versus Board of Education is an example of that. Then another thing that we'll look at is the social construction of race. Race is socially constructed. So race and races are products of social thought and relations. And so it's interesting, if you look at immigration law, for example, going back all the way to the founding of this country, the definition of who was white and who could be included is usually adjusted based upon the self-interest of the country. So, when you need somebody to work on railroads, we recognize and embrace Chinese Americans. When we don't need them, then we have the Chinese Exclusion Act. Same thing with Mexican American workers. Same thing with African American workers in some instances. So, Ian Haney Lopez, you'll see, does this notion of the social construction of race and how it is used as a tool to include or exclude based upon the interests of the country. Then there's intersectionality and anti-essentialism. In other words, when we analyze these questions, we just can't be one-dimensional in our analysis. Oh, he's an African-American male, that's that. But there is a number of, we'll see in the chapters, race and we're going to look at the connection between race and a number of different things. Most importantly is intersectionality. Kimberly Williams Crenshaw came up with that term, and the term critical race theory. But intersectionality looks at studying race and other components. Race is not one-dimensional. So race really connects to many factors. Then probably the most controversial aspect of critical race theory is storytelling and the unique voice of people of color. Now, you could critique that by saying, oh, that's essentialist because all people of color don't think alike. Of course, that's true. But what we're getting at here is that people should be able to express their own experiences. So a lot of what we learn in history doesn't have the analytical framework of the oppressed people. And so usually you say, well, the conqueror writes the history without including other viewpoints. How could they? And so this says that there is a counter-narrative to the law's dominant themes. And so you have to look at, so it's not like the Wild Wild West and the Cowboys came and there was this barren country and we just took our hands and cultivated, and now we have America. There was people here, so how do we explain that interaction? Or the Alamo, what do you think? What, Sam Houston and all that fighting, patriot, and so what is Texas, and who's there first? And so those are questions that are not usually included, but alternative perspectives. So that's what race and the law does. And this course sort of implicitly, but race and the law sort of looks at all of those things. And then finally, critique of neutrality. So oftentimes the law presumes neutrality. In other words, it's objective, it's fair, it's open, and when we talk about race, that really affects a process that is generally well functioning. And so even if you go back and look at a book like Democracy and Distrust, it's John Hart Ely. It's probably one of the most cited books in constitutional law theory. He does this thing called a process theory. And the whole premise of the book is that judicial review on some level is very disruptive because the system really works well. And so remember you learned the Carolina Products footnote 4, discrete and insular minorities? Now, so that is a rare instance where the political process fails to work. And so it is appropriate for the court to intervene and open up the political process. But many people make the argument that the political process is well functioning, there's no problem, and when race does come about, it's a rare malfunction, and we just need to handle it incrementally, not structurally. And so that's always an argument when we talk about neutrality. So those are the major themes that I look at, but look at the book on page 10. It's sort of interesting. So we've sort of been grappling with this notion of whether or not race should be at the core of our analysis. And so these questions at the bottom of page 10 really help us develop that. This is going from the premise that race is a social construction. So how does law fabricate race? How has law protected race and racism? How does law reproduce racial inequality? And then how can the law be used to dismantle race and racism? So that's one. Two, you see race is a normal feature. I mentioned that. This, on page 12, rejection of liberal understanding of the problem of racism. So that's a key dividing line because general civil rights discourse is that, well, if we keep trying, we keep doing lawsuits, we keep protesting, everything will be fine. But critical race theory looks at that as sort of slow, gradual incrementalism that is not really a societal reality. And then finally, the notion that this scholarship has to mean something. We're not just writing for each other with fancy theories. We're trying to connect with grassroots organizations in order to advance social change is one of the arguments. So what about some of these questions at the end? That's what I really want. Yeah, what about this first one? These are some fairly provocative questions. Do you think that it's possible, this is on page 16, do you think that it's possible for people to change their deeply held beliefs about race?
Yes.
Yeah?
I can't
Tell
say
me.
why.
Go ahead.
I think like if you learn something, you can learn something else, or through experiences or something else, or you can believe something else. Because then I don't know, everybody would just stay the same the rest of their life if you couldn't change your thought process. I think it's hard though. Potentially.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I think that is possible in kind of both sides, in like understanding perspectives and realizing that you can't see an issue if you've never been around it or you've been sort of in the chamber. And also, often issues are dehumanized. So when individuals that are not commonly around like diverse areas for certain issues, then your own perception is what's been socialized. So when you humanize an issue, you meet someone that's different, and you have these conversations, then there's like a direct point, I guess, that's like challenging your schemas that you develop.
So that the direct engagement with difference helps to inform your viewpoint. That's good. Anybody else? All right, this is an even tougher question. So you sort of took an optimistic view and said, yeah, more discussion, engagement might help people change, and that's good. What does racial justice look like to you, and why? So, and the premise of this question is that you have a lot of scholarship here, and everybody doesn't agree on everything, so critical race theory is a big tent, and people are articulating different views about how to reach this social justice point. And so, some people's work may be, well, that's good and innovative, but it doesn't go far enough. That's a common critique in legal scholarship. So there are a number of different ways to approach these problems. And you see that question, too, really builds upon our discussion. Scholars who produce this scholarship are all committed to racial justice, but they disagree on what racial justice looks like. Some think that racial justice is one where race exists. People have identities. There are differences between groups, and those differences are accepted. But there's no inequality between those racial groups. Others imagine that a racially just world is one where race has been totally eliminated, totally post-racial. It's no longer a category that describes anything, and race is truly neutral, doesn't mean anything. What does racial justice look like to you? What do you think? So the best of all possible worlds, if you could change the world and this is how it would look, what would you say the world would look like, and how does critical race theory help us to get there?
Yeah, I kind of see like both approaches. Like I think like it sounds good to be like race wouldn't exist, but I feel like when you remove race, you also like remove people's cultures and people's experiences. So to me, that's not what an ideal, I guess, racial justice would look like. I understand it, it sounds good, but to me that kind of seems like not trying to generalize, but that kind of sounds like a perspective of someone who hasn't been affected by things. So I don't know, that's just my opinion. I feel like it removes things that people need to recognize. Okay, so let me sort of take that. So let's say I'm going to be a conservative now and say, well, I've had all of those experiences. I'm channeling Clarence Thomas. I've had all of these experiences, and you're right about that. Racism does exist, but if we keep focusing on this, we are just going to balkanize. People are going to go into different groups. We're going to have this corrosive democracy. And look at where we are now. All we have is identity politics because people are in their own little tribe because we recognize race too much. So shouldn't we erase race so that we all can come together under a common banner and just be America? No.
Well,
to me, that's kind of like, I don't mean this like offensively, but I've heard, I have like some extended family that's like extremely conservative,
Yeah.
and they kind of do like the whole Ben Carson thing.
Yeah.
He became a neurosurgeon. It's like good for Ben Carson, but there's a lot of Ben Carsons who didn't. So
Right.
it's like,
That's true.
I don't know. I get the whole like,
See,
well,
but
look at us now.
that's another theory. So this is good how we talk. So that's another thing that critical race theory critiques. That's liberal individualism. Remember, Carlo, when you read the Constitution protects individuals, not groups? That's that. And so you don't put people into racial groups. You open up the process and let them achieve. There's no racial quota for success if it's open to everyone. And so then the argument gets used that, well, look at Ben Carson. If you study hard, that's good enough. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I just wanted to point that
No, I
out.
was just gonna say, I don't know. I get that like people can come from the same experiences and then come out like Clarence Thomas has probably a very different view than a lot of people he grew up with. But I still don't think that we can say, but look at us now. It's like, yeah, but look at what we have to do.
Ms. Paula and Ms. March.
I was going off that. I was kind of thinking the same thing. I feel like eliminating race, you're eliminating, I think, a sense of pride that people hold in their race and their culture and their background. And so completely eliminating it, I feel like that could create a bigger problem in terms of people that will still hold on to race and teach like future generations that we might hold that nobody has race, but we believe that there are racial differences. And so that could, I feel like that might take, this might be way out there, but a more radical approach in racism where it's, you may think we're all equal, but there's gonna be certain groups of people that still see race as a color difference, and that could take, I think, like a harsher approach to racism, if that makes sense at all. So I guess
Tell me what you mean by the harsher approach.
I think that would just make a more radical group of people that are racist, kind of take, it might spread out into their future generations, to where it's not really creating equality for everyone. It's, some people will see it as equal, but I think that might make groups that are isolated that don't see equality and still see race and promote racism, that might make that group stronger in a sense of they're going to not lash out more, but kind of just discriminate more because people are taking that approach that doesn't exist and they're ignoring it, and they still think that they're better than others. But I think like in my ideal world, it would be, you still have race, but people see past color in the sense of like hierarchies. I think people are very strong and believe that there's still a hierarchy in your race, and if we didn't have that, I think that would help a lot.
So some dismantling of the way things are and maybe moving forward with a forward-looking approach if the edifice of discrimination and oppression have been eliminated. That's interesting. Ms. March?
I believe that eliminating a race, I feel like a race would almost go back in time again, because eliminating a race, if you do that, you're basically creating another world, I guess, and allowing, like what she was talking about, unfortunately in our society there are people that are not budging and they're not understanding the true problem. And if we create a place where people can't have their own race and have their own cultural identity, then what do you call it? Who are we then? And it's not, you don't have the life, the culture that they come from, the experiences. You have something completely different that is going to mesh with the people that don't want it to be meshed with, and that could honestly just make it tumble even worse.
Now there is a Supreme Court decision, it's famous, Adirondack, you probably done this in Canada, but Justice Scalia in that case said there is one race in the United States, it's American. What about it?
No.
Go ahead.
I'm a little surprised that if given an opportunity to eliminate race, that everybody's not jumping on that wagon. I mean, this is like, we're here because it's a problem. Why wouldn't you just move into a world where no one is viewed based on their skin color? I would go stay for that. And furthermore, I don't think culture, I think it's like we insist that culture is tied to race, but it doesn't have to be. I mean, if I were born and immediately adopted into a Chinese family, I would have no racial relation to anyone in China, but would I not be a Chinese culturally if I grew up there my whole life? Like, what's race? Because again, I feel like we're trapped in this world where you have to be your race. And I don't see why we all can't just be individuals based on our life choices and our merits. Now, if you want to say that society is holding groups of people down based on their race, that's another concept. I'm talking about a utopian world, future. I would love to be in a place where race had nothing to do with it.
How do you deal with the argument about difference? I want to maintain my identity, and what you're talking about in your utopia would be sameness and homogeneity.
Well, I
and
think
so, yeah.
I say it was Cleo that made that about that we're all Americans. I think you have, it's like we're dividing ourselves into group identities, and that is a social construct because no one's born racist. It's something that's learned behavior some way. And if we all view each other as a family, as Americans, or however you can effectively do it, it's like we view each other as a global family. That might be too big for us to actually manage and facilitate that. But at some level, if it's a city or a neighborhood, or I would like it to be a country, it's like, if that's your number one identity, my brother isn't the exact same as me, but it's like maybe we don't agree on anything, but we learn to operate peacefully with each other out of mutual respect. And I think that's where this ultimately fails our society, is that we don't have enough respect for each other to listen to each other and to understand that maybe you think completely differently politically, but you have value and I should hear you out and we should compromise. It's not my way or the highway.
Okay, that's good. Ms. Kalajian, then Ms. Anderson.
I think like there's a good argument brought up, like, racism isn't just about like someone being derogatory against someone else. Like definitions are really important. Establishing what sometimes words are used wrong. Like culture and race are not the same thing. Or ethnicity and race. And that can get a little confusing when you have a lot of definitions and just like that's additions in the scholarly world as well when you're talking about like regular people not immersed in it and like how we discuss these issues, and also realizing that race is systematic and pervasive, and it's not just about name calling. It's like how systems and structures have been formed and created that people that are in these systems may not intend for them to be racist, but they just inherently are. We can't ignore that. And then we're also dealing with like the complexities within minority groups of like colorism and internalized oppression. So it's not that easy to just like we're all one race, or it's and kind of like the conversation that was it's a race and identity as well, because when we have discussions, like we see it within the Latinx community, right? It's like there were Mexican and then there were Latinos and then there were Hispanic and now they're Latinx. So it's just like all these like evolving identities, but like not everyone identifies as that, and just to force people into an identity is just kind of erasing their individuality. If that makes sense.
And so how do you deal with the point that, that still causes tension because you are acknowledging difference and trying to balance it, but that still causes tension in our society because that could lead to balkanization?
Yeah, well, I think it's like teaching ourselves that we are human and we're going to have inherent biases. And, as human development, like he said, no one is born racist, but we're born into systems, and there's like systems of socialization. So as we learn, we create these ideas of other people and those are humans, and then like those won't change unless they're challenged. So I don't think as humans we can truly move away into a world where there is no race, because it's just human nature. I think in a sense that we can move away from a system where there's equity, not necessarily equality, because we have to realize that there's like generational trauma in some of these minoritized and oppressed communities. So creating equality isn't necessarily an issue either. It's just really complex, and I think I'm rambling.
No. So having said all that, before I get to you, Ms. Anderson, how would your world look?
I think it's just like realizing that we're not perfect and we're going to disagree with people, and we do carry these like, our life experiences create these biases, and just learning and being in a society that encourages challenging ourselves, right, and moving away from these echo chambers and realizing why do I have this perception of this person? Because some communities are, very similar and, see difference in diversity, so it's not fair to push those people to think like someone that lives in Chicago that sees all that diversity. So it's just realizing that, in questioning, I guess it goes into like more critical thinking of like why we react a certain way to certain people, and more training of like, inherent bias and, all that.
Okay. Ms. Anderson?
Well, I guess I kind of just have a question, like, based on what Channing was talking about a little bit, like, what are we saying race is? Like, how deep are we saying that that's going? Like, is that just your skin color? Is that going to your cultural? Because, like, in a lot of, like, classes that I'm taking, like, social justice, like, race is just, like, someone's skin color. It has nothing to do with, like, really their culture, what their practices are, or something like that. So I guess I'm just confused on, like, how, like, when you say, like, oh, we don't want to see race anymore, like, well, how deep is that going?
So, good. So, we say race is socially constructed. We say race is a core normative principle in the law. We're looking at race as being encompassing in terms of the way the society is organized. So there is a legal, structural, cultural framework in which race is an animating feature. It's not just skin color, it's just the way race is categorized, used, and articulated in society. So the long-winded way of saying, I'm looking at it broadly, not just skin color. And critical race theory is too. It's looking at race structurally, systemically, and what that means. And you'll see from some of these articles and readings that we're doing that we're taking that broad view. So that's good. What about this? We already sort of answered question 4. And 5. So, yeah, this is what I want to get at. This is good. So this is a good build-up from what we've been talking about. Look on page 18, question number 7. And so you're gonna see this critique. I think it's important also to critique critical race theory. I mean, it's accepted now because it's been 30 years, but when this first came out in the late 80s, early 90s, it's like, well, these law professors, they really don't want to engage in scholars. They just want to write stories and then back it up with some propositions that we can't prove. And so you see on page 18, sort of question 7. They argue that critical race theory believes that the mechanisms that subordinate people of color are ubiquitous, but often concealed, results in scholars operating within a framework to possess a paranoid mode of thought, leading them to always be on the lookout for hidden threats. I mean, focusing so much on race is in everything. So I buy the wrong toothpaste at Kroger, and I say, Crest is out to get me because I'm black. That would be too much, right? And so how do we make sure that we analyze race appropriately? And so some of the critique of critical race theory, at least in the early part of it, was that so much focusing on race undermines the analytical validity of critical race theory. What about that? So notice this, question 7 on top of 18. According to critical race theory, racial hierarchy exists in the United States. And there are mechanisms that reproduce this hierarchy everywhere. So you can see it in the tax code, you can see it in redlining, you can see it in zoning, you can see it in banking, voting. They exist in society's approach to dealing with crime as well as the way it regulates securities. So that's just not skin color, that's what I meant when I said structural systemic. Further still, critical race theory is devoted to uncovering the ubiquitous devices that create and sustain racial inequality. Many of these devices are obvious, but many of them are not. Some of the argument is that these are invisible, subtle components of structural mechanisms that maintain oppression. And so then the response to that was, well, you're seeing race everywhere. And so the question is, do you think that Farber and Sherry's critique of critical race theory is a fair one? Is it ever appropriate to be paranoid? What do you think about that? So one of the challenges was, in terms of critical race theories, other scholars would say, where is the balance if you're always focusing on race? So where do we find balance? Are we being too paranoid? This is another way of asking, what is post-racialism and should we move away from race? Or maybe even can we move away from race? Is it even possible? Yeah, go ahead, Ms. Ross.
I just don't like the word paranoid because I feel like it implies a lack of reasonableness.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone can look at the history of the United States and say with a straight face that someone concerned about these mechanisms doesn't have a basis to see that in everything.
Right.
Like, I feel like to make that criticism is to not fully appreciate the full history from colonization, slavery. I mean, the examples are numerous. I don't see how you can tell someone that they're seeing something that isn't there when you take into account all of the context.
Well, it got pretty heated. You see this footnote 21, John Calmore. So he sort of says exactly what you said in that article. He's pushing back. And so in the early part, you see this is early 1999, just 20 years ago. So there was going back and forth about the authenticity of this scholarship. And critical race scholars would say, well, yeah, we need to say this. It's missing from the law. This is important. It is qualitatively accurate. It is valid. Everything doesn't have to be quantified. But there's even a branch of critical race theory now that is empirical. And so we crossed that hurdle. And so this is a full body of legitimate scholarship. But I'm just sort of illustrating that this is one of the criticisms. And we'll see that in our readings throughout the semester as well. But I think it's important to put that out. Now, were you able to trace the origins of critical race theory? That's really what Chapter 1 is about. And we sort of just did the introduction. But how did we get here? Do you get a sense from the book what happened? So can you tell me the difference? The reason I'm asking this question, I just want us to develop theoretically. What is the difference that you see between critical legal studies, which was liberal discourse? This was leftist thinking. What is the difference between critical legal studies and critical race theory? This is part of the contextualizing critical race theory. And there's something interesting that the book says on page 21. Critical race theory is a left intervention into race discourse. They use the Harvard Law School Protesters Act. And a race intervention into left discourse. And they talk about critical legal studies, the crits. But there were some things lacking in critical legal studies that critical race theory tries to address. So what about that? Someone trace the development of critical race theory. I'm interested in how you are conceptualizing this, because that's going to help us when we deal with all of these other theories. So let me put the development on the board and you sort of take it from there. So this starts around page 24 stuff. So you have classical legal thought. So I want to know what that is. So what I'm trying to do is sort of establish this as a scholarly discipline. And then this is going to help you when you're thinking about your reflective papers, the little 1 and 2 pages, and then also your ultimate research paper. But this is what leads to critical race theory. You have classical legal thought. You had legal realism. That's, the 20s and 30s. And then from there you have critical legal studies. A number of mostly white male legal scholars, Marxists, people like Duncan Kennedy, who critiqued the law in a certain way, and that was a good starting point. But then there was some discussion about what critical legal studies lacked. And so you can even say that critical legal studies is a more global critique than that advanced by the legal realists. And then you had what we're talking about, critical race theory. I'll put circa 1989. So someone traced the developments here, and how do we finally get to what we're studying in this seminar, critical race theory? What does the book tell us about that? And so this is sort of a component of race in the law does this as well. It looks at how race sort of animates the law and how it operates and impacts different racial groups. Now in critical race theory, we're sort of taking these theories and seeing how they interact. So how does critical race theory come out of that?
I can start off.
Go ahead, please.
So classical legal thought was that the law was a sort of like empirical thing that was not political, and that it was equal, kind of like there was not a real bias, and that you were coming to the right decision because that was the law and the law was the law.
That's good.
And then legal realism rolled in and said that any judge could take the law and come out with a plaintiff, but then another judge could come in and come out with a defendant. And it was sort of a critique of classical legal thought in that it was supposed to encourage judges to be more objective and more like results driven.
That's good.
And then critical legal studies said that that was kind of garbage, and that it was an entire mess, and that like what is the law if anybody could come to any decision at any time. So it was more questioning the law itself because it was unjust, because it wasn't fair across the board. If reasonable people could come to different conclusions at a time.
That's good. So then how do we get to critical race theory?
So the founders of critical race theory were attracted to the critical legal studies, and it's like throwing away of the law for being unjust and like maintaining unjust systems and societal orders. And that like the law couldn't really do anything to help people who were like victims of this unjust society. If people maintain the sort of the law as this like supreme authority.
And so critical race theory is sort of an answer to what is lacking in critical legal studies. What did they say was lacking in critical legal studies that critical race theory tries to provide? So I think they have common ground in critiquing how the law maintains systems of oppression, right? But critical race theory does something else. Critical legal studies goes further than legal realism. It says we're going to do a global critique of what has been advanced by legal realists. In other words, we're going to call into question the possibility of law itself. Law is very limited, and as you said, if you can come out either way, then what is the point? Law really doesn't have that much power. We should do something else. And critical race theory probably say, yeah, that's a good starting point, but there's something missing. So if critical legal studies are saying that law is sort of a body of thought that legitimates an unequal status quo, and what we're trying to do is expose those things that are incoherent and contradictory about the law and move towards liberation and social justice. That seems like good things. But critical race theory still found critical legal studies, even though there's commonality in how the law operates in trying to overthrow oppression. Even though there's that commonality, critical race theory sort of breaks away from that. Why do they break away from that? Go back to race again. What do critical legal studies, what do they say about race? Or do they say anything about race? Do they talk about, yeah, go ahead, Well,
they didn't want to identify as like a race theory, so while they did talk about race and kind of incorporate it into what they believed, they didn't want to be identified as solely a race theory, where critical race theory thought it was important that it was distinguished as that theory.
And so what explains that sort of distinct analytical approach? Why do critical legal studies people, why do they say, well, we don't want to, we'll talk about it, but so only on the surface?
Is there a white room?
Yeah, but I mean, but is it something deeper than that analytical? I mean, I get what you're saying. I'm not being flip. You're saying white men, and they may have sort of glossed over that because what they're trying to do is show how law is indeterminate and you can have different results, and we are advancing a really sophisticated critique of the law's incoherence and its contradictions, and that is going to move us to liberation and social justice. And we really don't have to focus on race because we are exposing the core inconsistency of the law. We don't even need to go there. We're doing this objective exercise, and we put race into it, that makes it more subjective. And that undermines our scholarly validity, and we don't even have to go there because we're showing all these inconsistencies, and we will gradually get to our own vision of social justice. Ms. Park?
Well, I was just, yeah, if they argue that kind of goes against their analytical sophistication if they
Race it up.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. So now you look on page 26 to 27. This is what is kind of troubling in the critical race theory, why critical race theory has sort of come into being. So there is agreement on the common enterprise of dismantling systemic oppression. The point where these two groups divide is how do we do it? And critical legal studies, they were trying to expose incoherence and contradiction of the law. But there were three things that were really troubling the critical race theorists. One was this notion of wholesale rejection of the possibility that law could be valuable to the subordinated. I mean, critical legal studies would really call into question the possibility of law itself because it's so incoherent and inconsistent. And critical race theorists will have this internal tension. On some level, they hate the law like critical legal studies, but they also recognize that the law could be used to dismantle oppression. Now, that argument goes back and forth between progressive scholars. How much? I mean, some people may say, well, if you do the traditional Brown versus Board of Education or voting rights litigation, you are just dealing in the incrementalism that you're trying to critique. But that is something that critical race theorists try to negotiate. They say on page 28 that the law had done powerful things for the vulnerable. Even with its problems, the law had done some powerful things for the vulnerable. So they reject critical legal studies' wholesale rejection about calling in the question about the possibility of the law itself. That was one. Two, and we made this point, this is on page 28 too, the critical legal studies scholars were viewed as sort of parlor or salon scholars. They are sort of intellectualizing and conceptualizing to show their analytical sophistication, but to what end? Are they theorizing for theory's sake? And so critique for critique's sake, that's a luxury that critical race theory could not afford. In other words, this scholarship, like critical race theories, is trying to engage a critique to end racial subordination, not only in textbooks, but on the streets and in grassroots organizations. So this scholarship should animate progressive movements, not just be kept away in a philosophy class. This is on page 28. And then finally, if we're really trying to end racial subordination, we need to have race at the core of our analytical framework because that helps us analyze systemic oppression. And so that's the parting of ways, and that's why we have critical race theory. And you have this notion of what happened at the University of Wisconsin in 1989. That was a conference of young scholars at that time really looking to answer some of the analytical shortcomings of critical legal studies. Now, it's important to note, and I think the text knows this, that there was some collaboration and cooperation between critical legal studies scholars. In fact, the person who helped convene this at the University of Wisconsin was a critical legal studies scholar. And so they listened to each other, but there was no coalescing around the analytical framework moving forward, and that's where you get critical race theory. That's the origins of critical race theory. I think, let's see. Yeah, that's footnote 20 on page 29. I'm sorry, footnote 20 on page 29. So just to make the point that it wasn't, this total antagonism between the two camps. There were just analytical gaps that could not be bridged, and they moved forward from there. What about some of these questions? We'll do some of them. So I think a major question, and this sort of comes out of what the readings. There was a major controversy years ago, and this is sort of the discussion about putting race into the discourse. A left intervention into the race discourse. There were protests at Harvard Law School. So Derek Bell leaves to be dean at the University of Oregon, also in protest of not hiring any women of color at Harvard. So he takes an extended leave, never really returns to Harvard, and is a visiting professor for the rest of his career at NYU. But when he leaves, a course like this was not being taught. And so it was proposed that a white professor, Jack Greenberg, who is an eminent civil rights attorney, takes over the Legal Defense Fund after Thurgood Marshall and leads it for almost 20 years. But the proposal was that he would teach this